In 1923, a new Romanian constitution was adopted. It was a democratic fundamental act that defended basic human rights and political pluralism. Between the two world wars, Romanian society underwent an intense process of modernization. Innovations were mostly visible in the urban areas, while the rural world remained mostly unchanged. Agriculture was the dominant economic activity, and its products were the most important export commodities. Industry was making steady progress, but foreign capital was limited, and Romania was unable to reach the level of Western European countries in terms of economic development.
The Times, 15th of May 1924. The Kingdom of Romania, oil and mineral resources, industrial progress, financial and economic position. Romania, in her new shape and area, is at present a point of attraction for foreign capital and for large enterprise. However, contradictory news is often spread in the foreign press concerning her resources and the possibilities of making use thereof. The country is inhabited by a population of nearly 16,500,000 inhabitants, i.e. a density of 56 inhabitants to 1 square kilometre. The most compact population is in the Old Kingdom. The major part of the land, i.e. about 38%, is covered with sowings. Besides that, there is also an area of about 25% covered with forests. These 2 points are the two main sources from which Romanian agriculture derives large profits. Industry. The industry in the Old Kingdom, developed during the last 50 years, was represented on one hand by the oil undertakings and on the other hand by the installations for the working of raw materials, which are to be found in abundance in an agricultural country rich in forests. They are cereals, wood, wool, leather, etc. Although the industry in Romania has sustained heavy losses on account of the war, losses caused either by the enemy or by the national armies which, compelled to withdraw, left as little supplies as possible to the enemy, i.e. oil, it made a good progress in the first years after peace was signed, 1919 to 1921, and succeeded in exceeding its pre-war production. The agricultural production of Romania, 1920 to 1923, owing to the losses the World War caused and to the changes brought by the agrarian reform since 1919 to 1920, the Romanian agriculture sustained heavy losses after the war. The present production has not yet reached the level of the normal one in the Old Kingdom, but it increased continually since 1920 until 1923. Mines and ores. The chain of the Carpathian Mountains contains numerous bearings comprising sufficient quantities of gold, silver, copper, lead, antimony, arsenic, iron, manganese, zinc, aluminium, etc., to be profitably exploited. Oil industry. Although before the war the oil production in Romania exceeded the home requirements in a larger proportion than today, this item is still the second principal commodity destined for exportation. Means of communication. Railways. There is a net of 11,200 kilometres of railways throughout the country. The railways transportation has received the government's most careful consideration. If the present railways do not meet the increased demands of the country, the traffic, however, is more compact than that prior to the war. Telegraph and telephone lines. The telegraph lines are 20,000 kilometres long, and there are 2,500 telegraph stations, 8,500 telephone stations. The telephone lines are 19,500 kilometres long. Romania's great financial difficulties are now over, and she is doing her best to properly utilise her national riches. Production is improving, it becomes normal, the exportation increases, and transports normalise. Romania has consolidated her foreign debts, has taken steps to pay regularly the coupons falling due, and has realised her budgetary equilibrium within her new boundaries.
The foreign policy of Romania during the interwar period was dominated by the need to maintain the Versailles system of international relations, which ensured the survival of Greater Romania. France, but also Great Britain, were considered the most important allies. The Romanian royal family continued to play an important role in consolidating relations with foreign political and trade partners. King Ferdinand and Queen Marie performed an official visit in Great Britain during the spring of 1924.
The Illustrated London News, the 17th of May 1924. Royal visitors from Romania. The King and Queen of Romania crossed from Calais to Dover on May the 12th in the SS Maid of Orleans, which had been sent over from Dover to fetch them. On their arrival at Dover, the Prince of Wales went on board the boat to welcome them on behalf of the King and accompanied them on the railway journey to London. The scenes at Victoria, where they were greeted by the King and Queen in person, are illustrated on a double page in this number, as well as the ceremony at the cenotaph. After that, King Ferdinand and Queen Marie visited Westminster Abbey, where they were received by the Sub-Dean, the Reverend W. H. Carnegie, and other clergy. The King deposited a wreath on the grave of the unknown warrior, and beside it was placed a Romanian war decoration inscribed Virtute Militara. Queen Marie also laid on the grave a spray of white carnations. She was delighted to be again in London, which, as a British princess, she knows well, and her charming smile won all hearts in the crowds that gathered to welcome the royal visitors.
An alternative strategy, meant to secure the borders established at the end of the First World War, was the building of regional alliances. From this point of view, Romania's most trusted partners were Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia. Together they formed the Little Entente.
The Economist, 23rd of June, 1934. The Little Entente in Council. On February the 16th, 1933, the three countries of the Little Entente, Czechoslovakia, Romania and Yugoslavia, concluded an organisation pact in Geneva, providing for a unified foreign policy and for a permanent council. This move was the direct outcome of two factors. First, the Nazi revolution in Germany and the Nazi threat to Austria. Secondly, the recrudescence of Hungarian revisionism under Italian patronage. To these factors have been added in the last year the rising tide of rearmament, the non-aggression pact between Germany and Poland in January of this year, and the political and economic protocols between Italy, Austria and Hungary in March. The Little Entente is now closer welded than ever before, and this not only in itself, but to France.
In 1925, the heir to the Romanian crown, Prince Carol, gave up his right to the throne and moved to France. 2 years later, King Ferdinand passed away and the throne was inherited by his nephew, Michael I, only a child at the time. A regency ruled Romania until 1930, when the self-exiled prince decided to return home. On the 8th of June, he was proclaimed King Carol II.
The Illustrated London News, 14th of June 1930. A romantic and dramatic return to kingship, the newly proclaimed King Carol II of Romania in the uniform of the Romanian Air Force. The exiled Prince Carol of Romania arrived in Bucharest by aeroplane about 10 p.m. on June the 6th and went to the barracks of the chasseurs stationed at Cotroceni, a suburb of the capital. He was enthusiastically welcomed by the officers and proceeded at the head of the 2 battalions to the palace, where he was received by his brother, Prince Nicholas. Next day, the regents and the Prime Minister resigned, a temporary cabinet was formed, and the 2 Houses of Parliament met as a National Assembly. The Exclusion Act of January 4, 1926, which had excluded Prince Carol from the succession and appointed regents, was revoked, and amid great enthusiasm he was proclaimed as King Carol II. Wearing the uniform of a general in the Romanian Air Force, he drove in a 6-horse open landau through streets packed with a cheering populace to the Parliament House, where the President of the Chamber informed him of the decision and welcomed the sovereign in the name of the National Assembly. The new king then took the accession oath to preserve the Constitution.
The following decade in Romanian history was marked by the struggle between democracy and radical ideologies. The radical right gained more and more adepts in Romania during the 1930s. During the elections of 1937, the Iron Guard was able to gain more than 15% of the votes.
The Economist, 6th of March, 1937. Romania's Iron Guard. A crisis has arisen in Romania, largely owing to lack of firm democratic defence of law and order. The Iron Guard is on the warpath again. It is a fascist organisation in close contact with Berlin, to whose discredit stands a long list of assassinations, from that of a prime minister down to those of poor students. This week, the rector of Iași University, a liberal, was savagely attacked and nearly killed. Scarcely a day passes but Jews or liberals or students or editors and journalists, or even conservative ex-members of the Iron Guard itself, are assassinated or brutally manhandled. The Iron Guard denies the more important of these outrages and admits the lesser in order to gain credit for its activism without opprobrium. But the murder of the late Prime Minister Monsieur Duca was shown to have been committed by members of the Iron Guard. And what does the Iron Guard want? Apparently mere fascism, friendship and perhaps more with Germany and Italy, and the dismissal of all friends of France, Britain, Russia and democracy in general. The Tatarescu cabinet, having elbowed out Monsieur Titulescu and his pro-French, pro-Little Entente, pro-Russian policy, finds itself weak and divided in domestic politics. The Peasant Party remains aloof, and neither the king nor Monsieur Tatarescu dares grasp a nettle. But if they do not, it will inevitably smother the Romanian garden with weeds.
Without a clear majority, the liberals were unable to organize an effective government. A strong political crisis followed, and the king decided to suspend the constitution. Soon after, all political parties were dissolved, and Carol II established a royal dictatorship.